Let's get down to business to defeat our opponents. It's not quite got the same ring to it, does it? Another month has passed in the wonderful world of Lorcana, and in terms of competitive play, it might just be the most impactful one yet. Beforehand, we were relying on a wealth of data from people regularly playing Pixelborn to have any kind of idea what the wider world was having success with, but the late September and early October have brought several $2,000 prize money events each and every weekend, from Caldwell, Ohio to Manchester, England. I've just finished writing my most recent article that's due to go up on TCGplayer very shortly about the top 5 best performing decks in Lorcana right now. So if you're more of a reader, or you'd like to have more of a detailed version of this video, a link will be available in the description box to go check it out once it is live on the site. But I thought for those that are maybe more visual learners among us, it might be nice to have a bite-sized version of that article turned into a video over here on YouTube. So if you do enjoy this style of commentary, you've got to let me know. Subscribe to the channel here at Beyond the Inkwell and leave a comment down below about how you feel about the metagame and about this style of video going forward. With all that said, let's take a look at the 5 best performing decks in Disney Lorcana right now. I feel like the delta between the top 4 decks and deck number 5 is arguably larger than it ever has been before, and this 5th spot likely has several contenders in the running, but after spending a little time looking at deck lists and data, I think Emerald Steel Aggro gets the nod as the 2nd best performing aggressive shell, but one that is more tailored to have tools for the other aggressive matchups, leaving it in the shadow of Emerald Amethyst in the eyes of many for now. The list you see on screen here is championed by veteran Hearthstone and Marble Snap extraordinaire Raven HS since they began playing Lorcana as a powerful strategy inside of a vacuum. You're going to be looking to play to the table early with Emerald's high questing characters like Flynn Rider and Cusco, and then look to refill the gas with a whole new world and Beast Mirror if your opponent survives that initial onslaught. The main appeal to favouring strategies like this one is how much power the Steel package gives you in opposing aggressive matchups, like Emerald Amber Aggro or Emerald Amethyst Aggro. Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and Grab Your Sword continue to be absolute powerhouses at clearing away characters that have been established early, or letting your well-statted characters trade into the opponent for value, and that priority is something that can be favoured in aggressive mirrors, and we back it up by a full 4 copies of Jasper Common Crook and John Silver Alien Pirate, other cards that are especially adept at swinging a lore race in your favour. I'd also like to draw attention to the surprising exclusion of Hans Scheming Prince, a card typically seen as a staple in these aggressive shells. Hans is still here, but we're choosing to prioritise Hans 13th in line as our only 4-cost card instead, who teams up very well with the aforementioned Steel package to eliminate ready characters on the other side, while still allowing you to pressure the opponent with aggressive questing in the early game. Really sweet stuff. If you're looking for a deck on the rise that the majority of players aren't particularly fluent in playing against, I'm fairly sure this Sapphire Amber mid-range deck is the list for you right now, coming in at deck number 4. It's still an emerging quantity, and I think it's likely better than our 3rd place deck this week overall, but it still needs refinement and some additional tournament results to back that claim up. So why does it make the cut if it's a newer concept? Well, I think it might be the only deck in Lorcana that has an actively favoured matchup into Ruby Amethyst control. This list you see on screen here is from Justin Wynn from Nat20 Games, and it might be my favourite deck list name of all time in Pineapple Berry Blue Typhoon, and I'll adamantly refuse to call it anything else moving forward. So what does this deck have going for it? A unique blend of Amber's powerful aggressive starts and card advantage opportunities, and Sapphire's well-statted characters and tempo tools, topped lovingly by a 1-2 punch engine that only this selection of inks can provide in the endgame. Sometimes this list will go as low as Lilo making a wish, or look to trade up with Philo, Trainer of Heroes, but Justin Wynn's version from the top cut here at Nat20 Games chooses to focus more on the core tenets of the deck instead. Play a similar grindy mid-range plan to Amber Steel mid-range, but we're gonna do it faster. By giving up the anti-aggro prowess of Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and Grab Your Sword, we gain access to Mickey Mouse Detective and Grammatala Storyteller, two cards designed to accelerate how quickly we can get to our endgame haymakers like Maleficent or Stitch Carefree Surfer, cards that are typically known to give Ruby Amethyst fits if they come into play too early. Wynn chooses to lean into that approach even more with copies of Belle, Strange But Special, the only card in Lorcana that will both accelerate your ink and provide a payoff for doing so at the very same time. And it's also unique in how it gets you to 7 ink 2 turns ahead of schedule, a very relevant number for Stitch Carefree Surfer and Hades Infernal Schemer. Hades is also joined by Let It Go, a very similar effect that's inkable in a pinch, but not only allows this deck to have consistent points of interaction, but incidentally plays around things like Magic Boom, Bucket Brigade, or even Hades Lord of the Underworld and similar recursion effects from rebuying the problems you were trying to get rid of. Speaking of Hades, this deck offers an endgame play pattern that no other deck in Lorcana really has. Hades alongside Eye of the Fates. By using one copy of Hades to retrieve another, you're never going to run out of characters that can quest for lore if you don't play the second until the first one is removed. Normally, this would be too glacially slow to be a problem for many opponents, but once you add an Eye of the Fates or 3, Amethyst control in general and similar long game strategies are forced to have a removal effect for each of your Hades every single turn, or find themselves ground into the dust. If your local meta is chock full of Ruby Amethyst control and very light on decks like Emerald Amethyst aggro, I would suggest picking this deck up and putting down your swords instead. Speaking of Emerald Amethyst evasives, it makes its way into our video today as deck number 3. I mentioned in my summary of the top 8 decks in the TCGplayer Invitational Qualifier earlier this week that you can find on the site right now, that event had helped solidify the top 3 decks to beat coming out of the weekend, and with even more data added into that, I still feel like that statement is very true. I do, however, feel like the distance between the top 3 decks is closer than ever before, offering us a unique metagame position where you can reasonably select any of these decks for an event and not feel like you're handicapping yourself. You can even select your favourite way to play, with an aggro deck, a control deck, and a mid-range deck all finding themselves in the mix. Emerald Amethyst aggro here had a great showing across many events this weekend, including 2 copies in the top 8 of our Invitational Qualifier at TCGplayer, and this list you see on screen now from Liam Cosma of the Illumineers, who split the top 4 over at Game Castle. This deck has a similar game plan to Emerald Steel, but as opposed to focusing on being better into aggro, we're trying to prioritise getting underneath control, all for less than $200 by the way. Cosmo's list here is packed with evasive characters all the way up the curve for the early turns, from Pascal, Rapunzel's companion, to Genie on the job, characters that are typically harder for decks like Ruby Amethyst to remove before turn 5, and forcing them to spend those important copies of Dragon's Fire and Be Prepared on these cards. If those cards are dealing with evasive annoyances, it's hard for them to also handle your high questing powerhouses, things like Hand Scheming Prince at the same time. Lastly, this deck can weave card draw into its plan as well through Amethyst's core pairing of Maleficent Sorceress and Friends on the other side, providing you with valuable resources to rebuild and quest for those important final points of lore once Ruby Amethyst has started clearing away your characters. Perhaps my favourite part of this deck in general is how it embodies a traditional tempo game plan, jockeying for board position, controlling who's ahead in the lore race, evasive characters let you decide how fast you go while being hard for the opponent to interact with, while bounce effects like Genie on the Job, Mother Knows Best, and Befuddle allow you to slow down how quickly the opponent can gain lore by removing the characters that may allow them to race you to the finish instead. Emerald mainstays like Jasper, Common Crook, and John Silver, Alien Pirate, provide a similar level of control over what your opponent is allowed to do, and that really solidifies this cornerstone game plan for what looks like a fairly linear deck at a glance. Be sure to look out for spots where these bounce effects can pick up your own characters and play them again, effectively preventing your opponent from challenging them. In fact, this is exactly what happened in a game we published recently on the channel, and is well worth checking out. I'd personally recommend picking this deck up if you're looking for an aggro deck to compete with, a budget entry point into Lorcana yourself, or you're a fan of those dark horse styles of deck. A lot of players out there are still under-respecting Emerald Amethyst aggro when it comes to their answers, and that's a good place to be when you're the one asking the questions. The next deck was really close to dethroning the king. In fact, I even made a guest appearance on Podcana this week, where I claimed that the Amber Steel Song deck was the most powerful deck in Lorcana. I think there's a very good chance that new tools from Rise of the Firstborn, or even further refinement to this deck, get it into the trophy-taking position, but for now, it's going to have to settle for another podium finish. There was no podium finish, however, for Nicholas Rausch, who took the above list you see on screen to a first place finish at the TCGplayer Invitational Qualifier held by Apex Gaming in collaboration with the Lost Boys. This version of the deck is just one of many, but it's centered around the incredibly powerful duo of Stitch Rockstar and A Whole New World, cards designed to provide you with a wealth of card advantage after your opponent has prevented those early Lilo making a wish from running away with a game. Rausch's list here is still leveraging the power of other known Steel Song powerhouses. Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and Grab Your Swords again make an appearance to keep those aggro decks in check. Ariel Spectacular Singer will help you find all those powerful songs and sing them way ahead of schedule. And Rapunzel, gifted with healing, still forces opponents to not aggressively quest in questionable spots, for fear that you might draw another handful of cards if they do. However, we're not playing all the way up to Stitch Carefree Surfer. That one might get in the way of our whole new worlds. While it looks like this deck is capable of doing everything, it's certainly not the only flavour of Amber Steel, as John Mann managed to show us with a 4th place finish in the very same event. Mann's list here looks to be a completely different approach to what the deck is trying to do. We're looking to grind the opponent to dust. Instead of playing to the board early, we're going to establish our dominance late, completely ensuing a whole new world because our hand should still be so full. I can't say the same for our opponents though, as we should be taking their card away with You Have Forgotten Me, and getting hundreds of years of bad luck from all the magic mirrors that Beast Hard-Headed is going to be breaking. Part of Your World, Hades, Lord of the Underworld, and Stitch Carefree Surfer are the style of card that cement this plan overall. The Steel cards are going to answer what your opponent is doing, and the Amber cards present threats that can also draw you more threats. I'm just not sure if we're actually drawing enough threats to kind of get over and above Ruby Amethyst control in the long run. It's clear that the raw power is here. These two inks just contain so many of the most powerful cards in Lorcana. The fact these two decks share so few cards and both put up incredible finishes is a best possible testament to that. But the raw power still feels a little unrefined, with players not really knowing which route is better or why, and until that time comes, I think Amber Steel Song will remain in the shadows of Lorcana's biggest, baddest deck, but it's certainly the one with the most powerful combinations and the ability to change that. In terms of deck number 1, you really just can't answer or argue with the numbers. Even if it's no longer winning every event it touches, Ruby Amethyst Control remains the most played deck with the highest top cut conversion rate, mostly off the back of the fact it feels like the most consistent deck you can play in Lorcana for an event that has many rounds, and it's still the only solidified home for Lorcana's most devastating action, Be Prepared. One thing is clearer than ever, however, the perfect deck list does not exist yet, and there's still numerous questions to answer when configuring your own versions of this deck. The version you see on screen is around 60 cards, where people tend to find themselves more and more often instead of the small handful of players still on 62 to 67. This list was Matthew Campo's. They took to a 2nd place finish at the Apex Gaming TCGplayer Invitational Qualifier and falls into the camp of the former. We're still trying to keep our opponents in check early through Gaston, Rafiki, Mysterious Sage, and Maui, Hero to All, until we can take away all of our opponent's hard work with a single copy of Be Prepared. Once you do, it's time to start slamming those big expensive haymakers like Elsa, Spirit of Winter, Ursula, Power Hungry, and Maleficent, Monstrous Dragon, of which Campo is packing the full 12. The majority of debate inside Ruby Amethyst control communities these days comes down to how many items you're playing total. Campo leans towards the light side, with only the absolute minimum required to do broom loops alongside the 2 stock copies of Magic Mirror. But this means they can't afford to ink their single Shield of Virtue or their single White Rabbit's Pocket Watch at any time if they feel the need to carry out those loops in full, something that feels like it could be a bit of a liability for such an ink-hungry deck. There's also 0 copies of Ursula's Cauldron, a card many players champion as a linchpin of the mirror match. For players who feel like that, or just want the ability to end the mirror match faster, there is another school of thought out there. Renowned TCG content creator Brendan Patrick has been having incredible success with a version of the deck packing significantly more evasive characters in the form of Pongo, Goofy, and Jetsam, as a way to not only give you additional options in the face of things like Emerald Amethyst, but particularly, it kind of serves as a way to overwhelm your opponent's removal effects in the mirror match. If every single evasive character is earning a copy of Dragon's Fire, Be Prepared, or Maleficent, that's significantly less copies of those effects that are left over to handle things like Elsa or Ursula. And if those evasive characters aren't being answered, they're just gonna happily quest away until they've won the game all by themselves. This version of the deck is still a little less conventional, but it is starting to catch on, with many copies weaving their way into top tournament finishes this week. We'll have to wait and see if this different take on an established deck is a flash in the pan, or the next evolution of a dominant archetype. Either way, Ruby Amethyst Control remains the most consistent deck in Lorcana, and in the eyes of many, the most powerful as well. And that means it keeps a vice-like grip on our top spot for now. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel here at Beyond the Inkwell. These types of videos are a lot of fun to make, but I do need to know whether they're the kind of thing you enjoy, and that's the easiest way you can let me do exactly that. If you think I've made a mistake, want to ask me more questions, or just want me to read you a bedtime story, you can find me over on X at Howling Minds, where I talk about many things and yell at the clouds. But I'm also very happy to discuss all things Lorcana with you. Until next time, I've been Howling Minds, you have been amazing, and I'll see you on the other side.